Hello and welcome to the competition studio. My name is Aleksander Laskowski and here with me is Mackenzie. Hello, Mackenzie.
Hello, Alexander.
You are a cellist by training, a musicologist by profession or by vocation, I should say. So just very briefly to introduce you to our audience, what brings you to Poland and how long have you been here?
It's a long story. This time I've been in Warsaw for about a month. And it's a musicological research that brings me here. I'm working on a project dealing with music in Poland right after the Second World War. So I'm here visiting archives, meeting as many people as I can.
Okay, you're an American in Warsaw. What an American in Paris might experience, that we know from the movies, that we know from the music as well. So is there anything special an American in Warsaw could experience, and is it connected to the music of Fryderyk Chopin in any way?
Well, in these last few weeks, there's been a very large mobilization around Chopin. So you can see advertisements, you can see signs, you can see lots devoted to his life. There are, of course, important monuments to him here that I think every American coming here for the first time probably visits. But overall, yes, there are, of course, traces of this you can find and you can see throughout.
And from your perspective, is the music and the figure of Fryderyk Chopin emblematic? Is it seen like a symbol of Poland in the world?
I think for in America and across the world, Chopin has many different functions and many different meanings. One of those is, of course, a strong historic connection with Poland. And I think especially for people in Poland, the Poles I've talked to, the people who live here, Chopin as an ambassador to the rest of the world has been very important.
Right. Did you have a chance to listen to any auditions here?
Yes, I heard the first three performances this morning.
This morning. So what are your feelings as a cellist?
As a cellist, of course, I wonder why they don't play the cello sonata. But no, it's of course at an extremely high level. And this morning we saw nocturnes, etudes, and ballades. And these are works of very different character, and it's a test of the pianist's ability to bring out both the refined technique you need in an etude, but then to be able to carry out the more dramatic structuring that goes into a nocturne, I think. So each one approached it quite differently, I would say. Yeah,
and everyone now starts with a mini recital that a given candidate has to sort of design to make the first appearance of the competition. Did you feel these were well-designed mini recitals?
I did. I think that the pianists were able to choose works that brought out the different sides of their own personalities. And they would often structure them. The first pianist, for example, put the etudes in the middle, so there was a sort of more of an arc surrounding those. But overall, yes, it's a case of showmanship, of course.
Very often we say that the music of Fryderyk Chopin is very difficult on many levels. So obviously the technical, but that's the easiest one really. And then there is the meaning of music, if there is any, and there is the emotional level. So do you think that young people who actually enter a competition to, on the one hand, show off their technique, but to show their personalities, to start their careers, do they have all it takes to really present the music of Fryderyk Chopin in its full glory?
It's a difficult question because, of course, someone who's been playing Chopin for 60 years brings a different perspective to the music than someone who's 25. But I think we saw here this morning quite a few different perspectives on it that indicate that, yes, there is this youth associated with the music that, of course, Chopin himself possessed as well.
Well, that's a good point, really. And now, if we could talk a bit about your research, because you research Polish music in the difficult years, difficult post-war decades, and the end of Second World War. Maybe I should remind our audience that actually during the Nazi occupation, Chopin's music was forbidden in Poland as too heroic and as a kind of music that would provoke heroic deeds in the Polish population. So. What kind of Chopin do you discover researching the Polish music of the late 40s?
It's very interesting because 1949 was the centenary of Chopin's death in 1849. And this was an opportunity for huge mobilizations across the political spectrum. A lot of this was older things, like they wanted to have another Chopin competition, the fourth one. It was also when they published the Paderewski edition for the first time. Right. So the first complete critical edition of Chopin's works.
Much criticized these days, actually.
Yes, but at the time it was quite forward-looking, and it was something unmatched up to that point. Lots of analysis. Of course, this was also the beginning of strong Stalinization in Poland. and of the dark face of communism. And, and you see this as well. Some of it was surrounded the keywords of popularizing Chopin, so concerts in small villages or in factories, et cetera, bringing Chopin back to the people.
Yeah, but on the other hand, there was this kind of tendency to really reinterpret Chopin's music as the true folk music of the nation, so to look for the peasant roots of the music that was elevated to a high artistic level and make it a symbol of a new People's Republic of Poland.
That's true, and you see that in Alexander Ford's film from the early 50s, right, where it's all about Chopin's relation to the progressive classes, to the revolutionary movement, and on the other hand, to the people. But what's interesting about this post-war period is that it's picking up themes that have long been a part of Chopin's reception. What is his relation to the Polish folk music? It's a very troubled question. Was he out there listening?
Sorry to interrupt you, but why is it a troubled question?
Well, because in this period, people were thinking, well, was he actually out, was he doing proto-ethnographic work, or did he have a more ideal conception of what a mazurka was? What's the relation between these folk dances and what we get in Chopin, which sometimes there are indications that, you know, this is related to a type of Polish music, but how do you get from there to there? I mean, that's in some ways an unbridgeable gap, but a very, very important one.
Right, right. And do you see any elements of Chopin's music in the works of later composers, the ones you research? And maybe we could just talk briefly about what names you focus on, which personalities in the Polish music.
So I'm interested in a few people. Some of them are quite well known, like Andrzej Panównik, others of them less well known, like Roman Palester.
Right.
Andrzej Panównik is quite interesting. We heard this morning a couple performances of the F minor ballad.
Right.
And in 1945, Panównik set this ballad to filmic images of Warsaw's ruins. So he evoked the destruction that Poland had just gone through by matching this piece to
and
what
which he experienced here in Warsaw, very tragically, losing a brother and losing the whole property and a beautiful collection of instruments that his father had built.
Sketches, and right, it was a very personal experience for him, and he found expression through that, through the music of Chopin and through this filmic.
So maybe we could say, looking at the reception of Fryderyk Chopin, that in a way you can find the history that followed his times also in his music, so it is in a way prophetic.
I think that's true. There's quite a bit to be said for that. Of course, Karol Szymanowski, who was a huge mentor to many of the 20th century Polish composers, would eventually latch onto Chopin as one of the most important figures. In Chopin's own history as an immigré living in Paris, having worldwide success while also maintaining connection to his homeland was hugely influential all throughout the 20th century in Poland.
And when you look from an American academic perspective, there is always this big question of what is the canon and what belongs in the canon. I think with Chopin there is no question. I mean, he's part of the core canon of Western classical music. Would you agree with that?
Of course, of course. And events like this testify to that, I think.
Events like this, you mean the Chopin competition in Warsaw? Well, what features would an ideal Chopinist have? You know, we have this wonderful way of distinguishing between a regular pianist and a Chopin pianist, which is called a Chopinista in Polish. You speak Polish quite well, so you know that. But I need to explain it to our audience. So what would be, for you personally, the features an ideal Chopinista would need to have?
This is another difficult question. I think an excellent Chopin performer is not only a good interpreter of Chopin's works, but understands how those works relate to the works that came after him.
And before?
Of course, before as well. But I don't know, I'm most interested in performers who can also play Debussy, for example, because there are, of course, traces of Chopin in Debussy.
Right,
Scriabin, for example. Scriabin, right? That see Chopin not as an isolated pianistic phenomenon, but really part of the main currents of music history.
All right, so that's one part of the answer, because that's the ability of a pianist to find the Chopin element in other composers who are influenced by his music, like, as you say, Debussy or Scriabin or many others, in fact. And are there any special features you would expect from a pianist? More classical, more romantic, a lot of rubato, or more sort of distance? So what would be your ideal approach?
Of course, one must have an excellent timing for this music in a sense that ornamentation flows effortlessly, in a sense to bend time, in a sense of rubato.
Well, there is this argument that you know, that the genius of Chopin's music and his genius as a composer expressed itself most visibly in the fact that he obliterated the difference between what is melody and what is the ornamentation. So he united it into one musical element where melody is ornamentation, really.
I would say he's also a master of forms. I mean, he wrote many small forms, but his way of controlling how we get from the contrasting section back into the opening material is impressive, and I think it's one of the best examples of this kind of thing. So I think, yes, I agree with you completely that there's this type of ornamentation and melody becoming one, but a pianist also must have a sense for how the whole is formed out of these melodic components.
Right. Have you played his cello music?
I have. I've played the cello sonata and some of the other works as well.
So what are your memories of working on that music? Because the reason I'm asking this question is, you know, here in Warsaw now, whenever you go really, you meet young people who are involved in the competition, and we go to the Warsaw University of Music to see how they practice. So you see so many different approaches, people focusing really on the technique, some people focusing on time, on the ornamentation, on dynamics. So what did you do?
Well, I should say first, it's an exhilarating piece to play, especially in comparison with other cello sonatas. The close relation between the cello part and the piano part on the level of thematic components, on the level of the trading back and forth of musical ideas, I think is really unbeatable for that period of cello sonata competition, or composition. So it requires a very intimate relation between the pianist and the cellist. That's what I discovered on working on it. You really have to be able to work every moment, every transition with one another. And once you figure out how all the pieces fit together, more of the things like dynamics, phrasing, expression, that will come. Because Chopin was such a great master of including that in the score itself.
Yeah, would you say this music deserves to be played more often?
I think the cello sonata certainly does. Of course, it is played by cellists, but it's on the periphery of what Chopin scholars or Chopinists occupy themselves.
The Chopin canon,
right?
If you want to use this word. Actually, another genre that is, well, it's hugely popular in Poland, but I think in the world is sometimes not even known really, is the songs by Fryderyk Chopin, which are also quite well, I would say lovely.
They are, yes. It's a shame they're not better known. I agree completely that they don't get the performances that the other works do.
All right. Now, what kind of expectations do you have towards the whole competition? Do you think we'll have another Christian Zimmermann or Marta Argerich this time?
Oh, one can always hope, but these things are never, one thing I think you learn is that the outcomes are never as clear going in as they seem from a historical perspective.
Right. Well, did you have a chance to look at the jury? How many great pianists we have here?
I did. It's a fantastic lineup. It really is. Okay.
And do you think, because there is a novelty this time, I think, we have a great musicologist on the jury,
That's
Professor
right.
John
Rink,
who's the editor of Chopin's works and author of many authoritative articles and books on Chopin's music. So if we could just play with imagination a little bit, because you're a musicologist as well, who knows, maybe one day you will be asked to be on the jury. So what would be your approach as a member of the jury who's the only non-pianist, non-professional performing pianist on the jury, who also has to evaluate the music on the one hand and then to convince the pianists?
At this level, I think it's difficult to judge technique because everyone plays on such a high level. What I think is what this competition does in a very fascinating way is it forces individual pianists to develop their own voice because it's a single composer, because it has such a limited, on some level, such a limited, means to work with. You have the text, and you have to show yourself through that text.
Yes.
And that's, of course, the most important challenge. So I would be very attentive. And I think I would try to bring things that pianists might not have. How does the entire performance come off? What sort of shaping, what sort of drama does the pianist convey? These sort of questions can get lost in technical details.
Yeah, but I don't think with this kind of jury you look for technical details. It's taken for granted, because if you don't have the technique, you probably are not likely to be part of the great competition. You get to the preliminary round, and that is where they tell you, okay, you have to practice more or find another job. Practice better, actually, is a much better phrase. But then, you know, there are so many different emotional approaches to this music, and with this kind of jury, where you have Marta Argerich, and we know her performances from, well, live concerts and recordings, and so many other great pianists who have given us a wonderful Chopin legacy on record. So can you imagine a conversation with them, you know, putting forward your argument that this particular emotional approach is the right one, really?
That's a scary question to ask. No, of course. I think when you're in the moment, you would do it. And I think it has to do a lot with how the pianist is able to control minutiae of their performance, especially moments of rubato. I think we saw that quite clearly in the 3 performances this morning, right? Because there's a very fine line between overplaying it, giving too much pause,
losing the sense of time.
Yeah, losing the sense of time. We're giving oneself in too much to it, and on the other hand, adhering perhaps too strictly to what's precisely in the text. So that's the border where I'm sure, I can't speak for this illustrious jury, but I'm sure where there's much discussion.
Okay, so now a very difficult question, and I have warned you. How would you define rubato as a professional musicologist?
Well, it's an interesting question. Important for Chopin was the model provided by vocal performance. And if you're thinking of an opera performer against a pit orchestra, there's always a give and take between what the orchestral accompaniment is doing.
The flow of the bel canto music.
Right. And of course, the director, the conductor, has some role in mediating between what the singer wants to do and what's happening in the orchestra. But having played in pits, there's only so much that can happen. So I think, of course, the ability of rubato for me, is to keep the underlying tempo and feeling of the pulse there while subtly varying it over it. So if you take time, of course, rubato means to steal, right? If you're taking time, you also have to be able to give it back. Yeah. And that slight balance is what sets apart the really fantastic performances.
Yeah, you know, for me, it is the way you breathe with the music where it's not even. So it's different when you take in the air and when you let it out. So you let the music breathe in a most natural way, and then it flows in a most beautiful way, but you still observe sort of the meter of the music.
Of course, it's this play between what's regular and what's human, what has to do with our bodies.
And here we are quite close to the beauty of Chopin's music. There is more to come as the auditions will resume very shortly. So Mackenzie Pierce, thank you very much for coming to our studio here.
And thank you very much for talking with me. It was my pleasure.
Yeah, it was my pleasure. So I hope to see you sometime soon, and I'm sure you'll enjoy the auditions that are to follow now.
I look forward to them.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.